Okay, well, it's 6:30. I'm going to keep my eye on admitting people, but let's get going here. I'm going to start off by introducing the co-president here of Northwest Chapter, which is Tip Wanoff. Tip's going to speak about our upcoming meeting a month from today on March 1st there. So Tip, I give you the floor here.
Thanks, Bob. So yeah, a month from today, I hope you will save the date on your calendar at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And I'll send out an email to the chapter listserv so that everybody has this in an email. At 6 p.m. on March 1st, we will welcome Ms. Kiana Sinks, the Community Engagement Director at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City. And she's gonna be on here to share with us all the things that are going on at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. There's a lot going on this year. They're going to be, Buck O'Neil is going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, which is a big deal out there because the museum was his baby. And so they're working on that, and they're working on a number of other things, including commemorative coins with the US Mint and everything else. So she's going to be on the call to answer our questions, to tell us all about the museum and what they've got cooking this year. And so I hope everyone who's on the call now will plan to log on March 1st to hear from Ms. Sinks, but stand by for an email invite expressing the same.
That sounds really great. I also just want to mention one more time that the book of Arthur, Phil Dixon, is going to be here in November live for the Buffalo Soldier Museum of Seattle. I've already contacted him and he's going to set a date, and I can put a couple of his books up on there. He wrote the Dizzy Dean book, Wilbert Reagan book. I think it's a Negro Photographic Encyclopedia. So I'm looking forward to seeing him.
Yeah, we all are. We'll publicize that. We'll put that out too. Okay, when we get closer to the time.
Thank you.
Okay, before we introduce our first presenter here, I do want to have a couple more SABR announcements. One is that the SABR Analytics Certification Program is online now, an on-demand curriculum offering professional development and learning opportunities for fans and of SABR members interested in sharpening their skills and knowledge regarding to baseball analytics. In the first course, Conversational Analytics and Critical Thinking in Baseball is now available online. There is also a new virtual event, Ballpark Figures, which is a monthly interview series hosted by award-winning writer Shaquila Taylor. That will debut in 2 days on the 3rd of February at 8 p.m. Eastern. She was the recipient of last year's SABR Analytics Conference Research Award for historical baseball analysis and commentary. And the interviews on the first Thursday of each month will begin in March. They will be free and open to all of us. The newly formed SABR Landmarks Research Committee is working to curate the most comprehensive list of baseball-related historical sites and attractions across the world. If any one of us is interested and just join the committee, go online to join the committee there and get connected with them. Early registration is now open for the virtual analytics conference, which will be now next month, March 17th to the 20th. Okay, and you can find out that on www.sabr.org/analytics. SABR, and as you may know, SABR and Sports Reference have produced The Negro Leagues Are Major Leagues, and a book of essays and research for overdue recognition. Okay, and you can download a free copy of that on sabr.org. Okay, all right. So that's. I'm going to let a couple more people in here. Excuse me for a second here. So that's what we have now. And I'm going to now take a minute to just introduce our first presenter and turn the computer over to him. Barry Hyman. I hope some of you had a chance to take a look at the article, Overall Offensive Performance, a new statistical symbiosis of different baseball events and things like that. And I'm not going to try to explain it anymore because I'll just mess it up But I'm going to turn this over to Barry then.
Thank you, Bob.
Hang on. Yeah, there. Okay. Now you have the control there. Okay. You can-
Okay,
Very good.
I've got some PowerPoint slides. So let me see if I can share screen. There we go.
There you go. There you go.
There we go. Okay, this is a new way to measure overall offensive performance in baseball. And I'll start out by talking about some of the problems with existing measures of offensive performance. Then I'll introduce OOP, this new measure that I'm proposing. Go through some of the rules for using OOP. Show how we could incorporate OOP data into a typical scorecard. And then I'll present some sample OOP data. Okay, if you think about how we measure existing offensive performance in baseball, we have a situation where a player trying to stretch a single into a double is not charged with the out if he's unsuccessful. Another example, player hits into a double play, it's not charged with producing 2 outs. You have the sacrifice fly rule. If the batter is on third and, if the runner is on third and the batter hits a fly ball and the runner scores from third, the batter is not charged with an out. It gets credit for an RBI. However, in a slightly different situation, if the runner happens to be on second when the batter hits a fly ball and advances to third, the batter gets no credit and is charged with an out. Situation with the ground, with a runner on first base and a batter hits a ground ball, the 2 possible outcomes. Okay, there's the forced play at second, the batter ends up on first, or the other option is the batter is out at first and the runner advances to second. The second outcome is clearly better because you end up with a runner on second, but none of the existing measures make that distinction. So here's some data for 2 ball players. We'll call them A and B. Player B has a better batting average and has scored more runs, but player A has more home runs and more RBIs. It's hard to tell which of those players is the better offensive player. And the goal in OOP is to come up with a single number that allows that comparison. So the objective of OOP is to measure the actual and immediate outcome of the offensive player. In contrast to a lot of very sophisticated sabermetrics type of statistics. OOP is not interested in estimating or predicting the eventual outcome of a player's actions. It's not interested in saying, well, if you hit a double with 1 out in the second inning, what's the probability of your team winning the game? Nor are we interested in comparing the outcome to other players. We're not interested in comparing the performance of a given player with a replacement player, or we're not interested in comparing the performance of a player in home games versus away games, or day games versus night games. All we're interested in is the actual and immediate outcome of a player's activities. So I think we could all agree that an offensive player's role is to advance as many players, including himself, as much as possible, and to create as few outs as possible. This then leads us to a definition of overall offensive performance as the ratio of the bases advanced divided by the outs created. Fundamental rule of this new measure is that all bases advanced must be counted and all outs created must be counted. So let's take a look at both the numerator and the denominator of this equation. Start with bases advanced. First, we'll look at the situation when the bases are empty. The batter could advance by getting a base hit, and clearly 1, 2, 3, and 4 points, depending on the nature of the hit. But there are other ways that a batter can advance. He can walk, get hit by a pitch, advance as a result of catcher interference. Could also reach base as a result of an error or a drop third strike. And in either of those cases, it may be the batter might get to first base, he might get beyond first base. But in all of those cases, let me go back. In all of those cases, the appropriate number of points are awarded. Now let's look at bases advanced when there are already runners on base. And now we need to distinguish between bases advanced solely by the runner without any activity by the batter, and then bases advanced by action of the batter. Clearly, a runner can advance by stealing a base, advance on a balk, pass ball, a wild pitch, or an error caused as a result of a pickoff attempt or on a stolen base effort. Now, if we're talking about bases advanced as a result of what the batter does, we need to distinguish between who gets credit, the batter or the runner. And the OOP rule is that the batter gets credit for advancing other runners at most as many bases as the batter advances. So if the batter hits a single, he gets credit for whatever runners are on base advancing 1 base, as many bases as the batter advances. If the batter hits a double, the runners on base advance 2 bases, the batter gets credit. But of course, if the runner is on third base when the batter hits a double, he only advances one base. Now, if the runner advances more than the batter does, then the runner gets the credit. That is, a runner on first going to third base on a single, the batter gets credit for advancing the runner to second, but the runner gets the credit for taking the extra base. And the runner gets credit for advancing on a fly ball out or on a ground ball out in a non-forced situation. Say a little bit more about that in subsequent slide. Now, the denominator of OOP is outs created. The obvious ways are the traditional ground out, fly out, and strike out, but there are other ways to create an out. An unsuccessful attempt to stretch a single into a double or a double into a triple is the player gets charged with an out. An unsuccessful attempt to advance extra base on a subsequent batter's hit, the runner is charged with an out. So this is a complement to what we had on the previous slide, right? If there's, for example, if the runner's on first base and the batter hits a single, if the runner successfully advances to third, the runner gets credit for the extra base. But if the runner is thrown out trying to advance to third, the runner gets charged with that out. So the runner gets the credit, but also if he's successful, but is also charged with an out if he's unsuccessful. Same thing with trying to advance on a fly ball or an unforced ground ball out. If you're successful, the runner gets credit. If you're unsuccessful, the runner gets charged with an out. The runner is picked off base or is caught stealing. It counts as an out. And a batter hitting into double play is charged with 2 outs. So we have every possible way of creating an out is accounted for in OOP. Now let's talk about keeping score. This is a picture of one box in the scorebook that is used by the Puget Sound Senior Baseball League that I play in during the summer. It's pretty complicated, and different scorebooks have different styles. This is probably one of the more complicated ones. But I want to show how even with such a complicated scorebook design, it's relatively easy to account for OOPS data. The way to do that, I suggest, is by adding a curved diamond outside the existing one and dividing that dashed diamond into 2 parts along each leg, and using the upper part in each segment to record whether there's a base advance, and using the lower part to record if there's an out created. We'll use as example hypothetical 3-player sequence, player A, B, and C. Let's say that player A hits a single. He then gets credit for advancing 1 base from home to first base. Player A then steals second base he then gets credit for advancing to second base. Okay, so now player A is on second base and player B comes up. Let's say player B hits a single. He gets credit. Right? But in the process of player B hitting a single, player A, who was on second, advances to third. Player B gets credit for advancing him from second to third on his single. So now we have runners on first and third. Player A is on third, player B is on first. Player C hits a double. Player C gets 1 point for getting to first base, 1 point for getting to second base. As a result of his double, player A, who was on third, scores. Player C gets credit. Player B, who was on first, advances to second. Player C gets credit for advancing player B to second and to third. But let's say player B doesn't stop at third. He tries to score from first on the double. He's tagged out. He gets charged with the out. So in this sequence, you had player A advancing 2 bases, player B advancing 2 bases and creating 1 out, player C advancing 5 bases. So anyone keeping score in a ball game can incorporate the information needed to do the OOP calculation. The data that I showed earlier, player A and player B, is actual data from 2001 for Armando Rios, who was with the San Francisco Giants, and Dan Wilson, who was the Mariners catcher. And as we saw earlier, Wilson had a better batting average and scored more runs, whereas Rios had more home runs and more RBIs. Well, what I did is I used the RetroSheet database to examine play-by-play activities for every game that Rios and Wilson played in the year 2001 and kept track of bases advanced and outs created by both of them. And therefore, therefore was able to calculate the OOP value. And here we see clearly Rios has a significantly higher overall offensive performance score than Wilson, something that clearly not obvious from any existing data. Well, that summarizes my presentation. And let me see, how do I come back and
I think people can, just ask questions and you can hear them. You can stay there if you want, or
Yeah.
I can pull you.
Okay.
There you go.
all right, here, I'm back.
Okay.
Yes.
Mhm.
I'd be curious, the comparison between those two, between Wilson and Rios, Was there a difference in where I remember back in those days, 20 years ago, that Dan Wilson, he used to hit fairly low in the Mariners batting order. Would that factor into this?
Possibly. But, you know, I went through the entire season, every at bat, right? Every inning that they played in every game. So, and the only thing I was interested in was accounting for bases advanced and the outs created.
That's a neat statistic. I'm surprised nobody came up with that before, but.
Well, if you, in the article that was, that appeared in the Baseball Research Journal, I did go through as many statistics that I could find. Some of them had some of this information. Some included stolen bases. Some included caught stealing. Some included bases on balls. Some included wild pitches. But I could not find anything that put the whole package together. Most of the statistics that are used today do not account for the batter's effect on the runners that are already on base, except for RBIs. Right? If there's a runner on first and the batter hits a single, batting average doesn't give him credit for advancing the runner. On base percentage doesn't. Slugging percentage doesn't. Okay. And as I pointed out in the article, quite a few people argue that you really need to account for not only the bases that the batter accumulates, but his ability to advance other players ahead of him.
Interesting.
Did you ever figure out the OOP for a star like Willie Mays or Hank Aaron? Like, what's a good number for
No,
them?
well, I did it for Rios, Wilson, and in the same year I did it for Ichiro and Barry Bonds, and that information is in the article. It's tedious going through the entire season, every inning of every game. So that was about as much as I had patience to do. I invite you to supplement.
So how far ahead did Barry Bonds and Ichiro come ahead of Wilson and Rios?
Oh, significantly. I have the results right here. Let me go back. Let's see. Wilson was 1.06. Rios was 1.32. Ichiro was 1.55. Barry Bonds was 2.64.
Wow.
I mean, that was the year that he hits 70 odd home runs and was intentionally walked millions of times. Yeah, but I was surprised that his OOP value was that much greater than Ichiro's. Ichiro won the batting title and stole 60 bases or whatever. So I thought it would be fairly close between the two of them, but it wasn't.
Interesting.
So we don't have enough data to plot something on a curve then, so we could figure out
Right.
where they stood compared to the rest
Right.
of the league.
All I did was 4 players in one season,
Mhm.
but
Yeah,
I
can-
invite you all
yeah.
to,
Barry, I think it's a really nice concept and a great idea, and nothing like anything I've ever heard of before. But I think your detractors might tell you that, number one, it's there's a lot of luck involved in this in generating a high OOP, and I would imagine there's a high correlation between a high OPS and an OOP. So some people might tell you that there's really no need for any such as an OOP.
it turns out that I did calculate the OPS for those 4 players. And they did end up in the same order, but the ratio was substantially different. For example, if you compared Bonds to Wilson, the OPS was 1.9. Bonds OPS was 1.9 over Wilson, but for OOP, it was 2.5. So I have an intellectual problem, as a lot of people do with OPS, as adding 2 numbers that really shouldn't be added together, but that's a separate issue.
So it's interesting though that your statistic, it takes into account base running ability also.
Yes,
Like a batter can lose points based on poor judgment or whatever, and you also lose points for hitting into a double play.
right.
I'm impressed, man. How did you come up with this? What made you think of this thing, man? It's
Well, I just kept thinking, how come somebody who hits into a double play isn't charged with 2 outs, or,
I like it.
somebody who hits a single and then steals second base, that's as good as hitting a double. How
What?
come?
I love the simplicity of it, man. I really like it. It's 2 numbers, comes up with a 3rd number. I like it.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll give you an example of what I think this is really cool for. It's like the 1965 World Series when Koufax was pitching, and if you watch the game, which is on YouTube, he controlled not only the offense but the defense at the same time. And he affected those numbers tremendously of what the Minnesota Twins had, because he was a master at it.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that people in baseball forget is the quality of pitcher, getting rid of I hate the DH, and I think when they kill it, when they kill off the pitching in the National League, it's going to forever mess up the numbers. But go back to the 65 World Series. You want to see somebody that made this really happen. The incredible game.
I remember
Barry,
that day. Yeah.
I've got a question. One of the examples you used in the flaws of the existing statistics was it didn't make a distinction, for example, for the batter who advances the guy to second base, but he's thrown out at first, versus the guy who gets the force out at second. Obviously, it's a better outcome to end up with a guy at second. But as I read this, your numbers would come out the same for that batter who is thrown out at first, but he advanced the guy to second. He'd get credit for 1 base. And if the guy got forced at second, he ended up at first, he'd still get credit for 1 base.
No, because I wrestled with that. It took me a while to figure that out. In a forced play situation, you start with a runner on first. The batter hits a ground ball into a forced play. You end up with a runner on first. So there's no bases advanced. It's only you had 2 people switching places at first base.
I see. Okay.
Barry, I have a question, and I don't know whether your system can really evaluate this, but when you hear baseball players will talk about a player, maybe a Hall of Famer or anybody, say, oh, he was a great base runner. But does OOP measure that, or how can you measure that?
Well, you can measure it by stolen bases and by taking the extra base.
True, that'll show a measurement of number, but when you evaluate a base runner, he's not going to get caught. Sometimes he will not advance and prevent a run, an out being made. And other times, because he's a good base runner, he will accumulate an additional base
Right.
advanced.
And won't the guy who got the hit behind him, runners on first,
Yeah,
guy hits a single, and he goes to third because he's a great base runner, but
Yeah.
the batter gets credit for that extra base, not the runner. I think that's what you were saying.
No, not an OOP.
no. The base
If the
runner gets
batter
credit
hits a
for that.
single, he only gets credit for advancing the runner one base.
Yeah.
The runner gets credit for advancing the extra base.
Yeah. But I guess, Barry, the question that is not measurable, as far as I can tell, is that the base runner, let's say a guy's on first and a guy hits a single. He determines based on where the ball was hit, how hard, that he can't advance the third. So he just goes one base. Now, if it's hit another place, he can advance the third base, but there's no way to determine his judgment as a
Right.
base runner.
Right. No,
Yeah,
this doesn't measure judgment. It just measures outcome.
right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it can't be perfect. And similarly, you can't, the guy who tries to score from second is thrown out at home is going to get credited with an out, but it may be because the third base coach sent him when he shouldn't have.
Right. It's the coach's fault or the manager's fault. Yeah. When the manager tells him to bunt, but baseball is full of those things. A guy can hit a screaming line drive, right? And the outfielder leaps over the fence and catches it. So he's out. The next batter can hit a little dribble 20 feet in front of home plate and get on base with a single. So baseball is full of those types of situations. Yeah.
I try to clarify something. So man on first, and the next guy hits a single, and the guy is able to go to third. So how many points does the batter get? Just one or two?
If the batter hits a single, the batter gets a point for going to first and a point for advancing the runner from first to second.
And then there's 1 point that the runner gets for the extra base.
If the runner goes to third, then that point goes to the runner.
Okay, so the number of points is always going to add up to what base the lead runner ends at. Right.
I didn't hear that. Say that again.
The number of points for a particular successful base hit is going to end up being the same as whatever base the lead ends up at. 2 + 1 is 3, and he's at third base. Right?
Yeah. I mean, in some cases, it's, clearly it's the coach's, the third base coach is telling the guy whether to come or to hold up, right? And it's the manager who decides to give him the go-ahead to steal the base or not. Can't take those things into consideration. Have to count just account for the outcomes, not the decision-making that went into producing that outcome.
So if there's a man on first, there's a base hit to left field. The runner advances to second. The batter gets 2 points, the runner none. But
Right.
if the batter gets a base hit to right field and the runner advances to third, that batter did something extra special by hitting behind the runner. He should get a half of that point. He's the one that created the opportunity.
Yeah, well, but again, that's a judgment call. Depends on how hard the ball was hit, who the fielder was, you know, if Ichiro was the right fielder or not. You know, there's a lot of things that factor, how much of a lead the batter had, how much of a lead the runner had before the batter hit the ball. Those sorts of things are judgment calls, and it's hard. You know, I decided that particularly if you're going to go back and look at historical data, like I did for 2001, you don't have that sort of information. All you have are the outcomes of the plays. So I had to, you know, I decided the best thing was to just have a set of hard and fast rules that applied in all situations.
So could there be a park effect in OOP?
Say that again?
Could there be, could we see a park effect in OOP for the reasons that the ballpark might allow runners to advance? Or
Yeah, but I'm not, again,
I'm just, you know.
Day, night, home, away. Yeah. Who the pitcher is.
Hey, Barry, I think you're onto something really good. I really do.
Barry, I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of your talk, so I may not have heard your review of the literature, but on the retro sheet site, I found a paper by someone named Gary Hardegree, in which he proposes something called base advance average. And this was a while ago because his most recent statistics are from 2004.
Well, tonight I didn't go through the literature review, but the article has a very thorough literature review. And the one that you're talking about, what's the statistic?
Base advance average. The guys from UMass Amherst.
And what's the name of the statistic?
Base, that's the name of the statistic, base advance average.
Base advanced average.
And it's on the retro sheets that site.
No, I don't think I found that one. Okay. I'd be interested if you.
He does say that Barry Bonds had the best base advance average in 2001.
Okay.
No surprise.
Neil, what's his name?
If you could send me that the citation for that, okay. I'd appreciate it.
I can do that. It's Gary M. Hardegree, H-A-R degree, Hardegree. I'd never heard of him, never heard of the stat.
And
Nick has put, or somebody has put the reference on.
Yeah, just as a side to this, I note that
it's in the chat.
I note that Mark Panklin is one of the people cited here, and we are all grieving for his loss.
Well, one thing's for sure, it's better than OPS. I agree with you on that.
But OPS has the advantage of being computable in your head.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I agree that it's numbers. You're combining numbers that don't.
Right.
Doesn't make sense to me.
But at least it puts you in the right ballpark, you know, that so to speak.
What?
So you know, Barry Bonds has a better OPS than Tom Verizon.
Hard to believe. Well, yeah. It'd be a Herculean task, but if you could chart OPS and OOP and look at the differences between the two, somewhere in there might be some knowledge. There might be some insight.
You know, it seems to me that.
But again, OPS does not account for the runners that are already on base and does not include base running accomplishments.
Yeah.
Barry,
Well-
I just thought of this, but I don't know how accurate it is. But it seems like if you take OPS, it's kind of a macro look at a player's contribution, whereas OOP is more of a micro look at a player's contribution. Does that make any sense?
I would disagree.
Okay,
I think OOP includes more than OPS because it includes base running and it includes your ability to move people ahead of you. OPS says absolutely nothing about whether the bases are empty or whether the bases are loaded when you get your hits.
okay.
So,
Plus, I like it because it's two understandable things. I mean, it's like outs. I mean, that's basic. It's like outs and bases advanced. I mean, to me, when I see an OPS number, I think, what the heck does that mean? I don't know what that is. Anyway, I like it, man. Good job.
okay.
Thank
Hey,
you.
thank you very much, Barry. I think I'm going to ask us to come to a stopping point here because we do have another presenter here. Okay. So
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
This
for your
is
attention.
recorded, so you can go back and review this, Neil or anyone else that wants to see this. And the article is in the latest edition of the BRJ.
Yeah, it starts on page 130.
Uh-huh. Okay, so now I'm gonna find Rob Bauer. Rob, I'm gonna make you co-host as soon as I can click onto your, there you go, there you are.
Great. Okay.
Okay, so, and I made you the co-host, so you can share the screen, your screen there with us as you go along here.
Okay. So I click the share screen, then go
Yeah.
to the slides and
Yeah, it should,
Full screen 'em?
if you have the slides on your
Yeah.
computer, you should be
Yeah.
able to click share screen and go from there.
all right, let's see if I can get that right here. Okay. So,
There you are. Yeah,
all right.
there you are. Okay. So thanks to Rob Bauer. Rob present. We're going way down into the 19th century here. His presentation. And I'm going to let him just take it over here at this point, rather than go linger here. Okay. Thank you,
Okay.
Rob.
So
Thank you.
everyone
Barry.
can see the screen now.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so the thing I want to talk to everyone about today is the terminal decline of the American Association. You might remember
Yes,
that
prettier slides.
in the 1890s, there were two major leagues. There's the National League that we still have, of course, and the American Association. And in 1891, the American Association came to an end. And just speaking for myself, the stuff that I had read on this previous to the research I did for the books that I wrote about 19th century baseball, kind of linked the end of the American Association with the end of the Players League, the defeat of the Players League in 1890. But when I started doing all this research, I realized that most of the stuff I thought I knew about that was either misleading or incomplete. And so I put together this talk to hopefully give people a better idea of what was going on. So if this is something that you've looked at a lot yourself, some of these things might be familiar, but if you're in the position that I was before I started with this, then you'll probably learn some things here. So the four main things that I came up with, the four main categories for the end of the American Association is some issues with management, actually a lot of issues with poor management. We have some greed issues, and I know that's probably doesn't sound like news to anyone who's ever followed professional sports, but the greed takes a particular form in this case. We're gonna look at what that is. We have some rivalries between the owners of the different teams, and interestingly enough, we have some morality laws that actually influence what's going on. All right. So the first big issue that really starts to hurt the American Association shows up in 1888, and that is they're trying to figure out what to do with their ticket prices. Prior to 1888, you can see the numbers on the screen there. The National League had charged 50 cents for bleacher seats and 75 for the nicer seats in the grandstand. And the association had charged 1/4 less, 25 and 50. Unfortunately for the American Association, they have to pay the same price to get talent that the National League does because they're competing with each other. And so several of the American Association teams are feeling the pinch of how are we going to compete for top talent when our revenue is not so great as what National League teams have to call on. So for 1888, they decide to take the plunge and raise their ticket prices to National League levels. Even though not all owners are in favor of this, enough of them are that they decide to make this change. But things do not really go as planned. So partway through the season, this is what one of the sports writers of the era had to say about it. I'll read the quote too. I'll let you read it for yourself.
Go ahead and read the quote, please.
Okay. The association prospects are not cheering. This is certain. St. Louis is a dead rabbit town, and the club that is such a magnet away from home cannot draw more than mosquitoes and Joe Pritchard in its own bailiwick. The high tariff has crippled Baltimore and would have killed Philadelphia. Louisville is struggling along, thinking much and saying little, while Cleveland is near a paying basis. Interesting here, when you say he would have killed Philadelphia, what that refers to is that Philadelphia is one of the cities where the National League and the American Association both had teams. And the owner of the Philadelphia National League team, a lawyer named John Rogers, was a huge fan of 25-cent tickets. He just thought that that was what baseball tickets should cost, even though the rest of the National League charged 50. So he had permission to charge 25 as long as the American Association team was doing the same. And so he kept his tickets at 25. The Philadelphia Athletics were the American Association team, and they dropped their ticket prices back to 25 when he did that. So that they kind of had this loophole around the situation. Well, people are not in agreement at all of what they should do. So in August, middle of the season, they hold a meeting. Now, the American Association Constitution says they can change the rules if 3/4 of the people agree, which usually 6 of 8, but only 6 teams show up to the meeting. And the reason why there's an asterisk after 5, you all know that tends to signify in baseball something's going on. And that is that the Kansas City team of the association has a conditional franchise. The rest of the American Association can vote them out of the league if they want to at the end of the year. So naturally enough, they voted to change back because they wanted to make as many friends as possible and keep themselves in the league. And then the guy who a picture I posted here, Charles Byrne, he's the owner of Brooklyn. He also decides to return to 25 and 50-cent tickets, which is a big surprise because Brooklyn has the best drawing team in the league. He's making a lot of money off 50-cent base tickets. So why would he do this? Well, it's pretty interesting. At the time, the way it worked was the American Association would give the visiting team a percentage of the gate. So no matter if 20 people show up or 2,000 people show up, you get a percentage of the revenue from ticket sales that day. So what Charles Byrne wants is he wants to go back to a guarantee where you just guarantee no matter how many fans show up, you get X amount of money. And of course, the reason for that is that Brooklyn has the best drawing team in the league, and he will get to keep a lot more money if they go to a lump sum guarantee for visitors. The rest of the association is desperate, so they agree. The other thing that happens at the same time is he essentially extorts a player from the Baltimore team, Tom Burns, different guy that plays third base for the White Stockings. This is a guy named Oyster, because apparently he loved oysters, and he also had a Titanic temper, it appears. He brawled more than once. But anyway, this guy's transferred from Baltimore to Brooklyn in mid-season, right when this meeting happens. And then the third reason that Byrne changes his mind, the little preview of what we're going to talk about at the end with the morality laws, but rumor has it that New York is going to ban Sunday baseball. New York State is going to ban Sunday baseball. And if he loses Sunday games, that's going to be a big loss of gate revenue. So in his mind, making tickets cheaper on the weekdays is going to encourage more people to show up on the weekdays and make up for the loss of Sunday baseball. Now, most people are happy after this, but not Cleveland. According to Cleveland's owner, he says this is a good 50-cent ball town and a league club would draw better here than in any other city in the country except Chicago, New York, and Boston. The association has struck us a foul and cowardly blow, and I am in favor of quitting. And interestingly enough, this is bad timing for the association, but 1888 happens to be the year that Detroit disbands their team and quits the National League. I'm halfway convinced there's a conspiracy behind Detroit disbanding their team in 1888 and quitting the National League. Hopefully someday someone will get to the bottom of that. Or if they have, I'm not aware of it. But in any case, Cleveland is replaced by Columbus. And you see from the numbers I put there on the relative population of those two cities, Columbus is about 1/3 the size of Cleveland when it comes to the fan base that they have to call on. So a definite minus for the association here. A city that was doing pretty well, replaced by one that's really going to struggle to draw fans just because it's a smaller town. Now, the next issue that really hurts the American Association is after 1887, the guy we met a few minutes ago, Charles Byrne, he buys all the players on the New York Metropolitans, takes the ones he wants on his team, and sets the rest free. But that means that the association now has no team in New York City. New York City and Brooklyn were still separate entities. They don't combine into one until 1898. What had happened in New York to really wreck the Metropolitans was they didn't have a good place to play in New York. One of their ballparks that they played in earlier in the decade was right next to a dump and several chemical plants. So the smell alone tended to keep fans away from the park. So in 1887, they tried moving their games to the St. George Cricket Grounds on Staten Island, but that meant that their fans had to take a ferry just to get to the ballpark. The owner of the Metropolitans, a guy named Erasmus Wyman, owned both the ferry and the team. So he's hoping to make money both ways. But unfortunately for him, the team was lousy and people weren't willing to take the ferry trip just to go see the Metropolitans losing their game. So what they do is instead of having a New York team, they get Kansas City. And that definitely carries some problems with it. One of them being that Kansas City already has a team in the Western League that's been around for a few years, and that team has controlled the best ballpark in Kansas City. So that's a big problem. They have a second-rate ballpark as well as a new team with inferior talent that's not going to be that good. And then the other big reason is that in those days before air travel, it took about 33 hours to get from New York or Boston to Kansas City by rail. So any team that traveled to play there was going to have enormous transportation cost as well as just the time to get there. So these are all big issues with bringing in Kansas City. Here's another one you've probably thought of already, but Kansas City has 8 or 9% the population of New York City at this time. So again, losing the nation's largest market, going to a medium at best market in Kansas City. And one other little side consequence of this is they made Cleveland still more upset. Essentially, the way scheduling worked at that time, you had 4 Eastern teams that were east of the Appalachian Mountains, 4 west. But when you traded New York for Kansas City, now you had 5 in the west. Cleveland had to be classified with the Eastern teams for scheduling, and it really ran up their travel cost again. And there's just one more reason that Cleveland left and went to the National League after the season. I promised you all a little bit of humor in this talk, and at least I found what was happening in Louisville to be pretty funny. So a guy named Mordecai Davidson takes over the Louisville team from the previous owner, Zach Phelps. Now, granted, in 1888, the team is not good. You see their record there. They lost about 2/3 of the time, largely because they were depending on Pete Browning and Tom Ramsey, 2 guys who were just heavy alcoholics and drank all the time. Those are the best players on the team, unfortunately, as well. So they're depending on some really undependable guys, and the team didn't do well. But the next year with Davidson in control, they lose 26 straight at one point. They become not only the first team to lose 100 games in Major League history, but also they go all the way to 111. And then here's a great number. The next year without Davidson, they win 61 more games than they did the year before. They go from worst to first, and they actually win the American Association in 1890. So let's look at the things that Davidson did to really just wreck this team and by extension, the American Association. The first thing that he does is he appoints this guy as his captain, Dude Estabrook, great nickname. Apparently he fit the part. He really tried to dress like a fancy dude. But Davidson's a former Civil War guy, and he tells Estabrook to ride the guys hard, get the most out of them, really push them hard. And so Estabrook does exactly that, and the guys get angry because he's always in their face and running them down. And so then Davidson releases Estabrook from the team after just a week and a half of the season. And of course, he released Estabrook for doing the exact things that he told Estabrook to do before the season. And this is just one of those things. Estabrook had been in the league since 1880. He was a 10-year veteran by this time. It's not like people don't know what his personality's like, but Davidson thought he would be a good captain and then changed his mind after 2 weeks. So the next thing he does is to release his shortstop, Phil Tommy, who was not really a hitter, but a pretty capable defender, and move Chicken Wolf to shortstop. Wolf stood about 5'8" and weighed about 190 pounds, not really the body type you think of a shortstop. Here's a couple fun quotes I came up with about Chicken Wolf. The Louisville team has a leader, in at least one particular. Jimmy Wolf had a reputation of being the biggest eater in the profession. And when the fat boy is hungry, he will often enter a restaurant and eat as many as 4 chickens. So he was not really qualified to play shortstop at all. He was a right fielder most of the time. And so immediately this decision started drawing derogatory comments from the press. They called the Louisville infield the rail fence infield because it had big holes in it like a rail fence does. In contrast, the Chicago White Stockings with their stone wall infield of Tom Burns, Ned Williamson, Cap Anson, and Fred Pfeffer that stopped everything, or so people thought. So Louisville now has the rail fence infield, and one of their pitchers ends up going to play right field. Red Eddie puts up a 756 fielding percentage, and as you all know, a little league 10-year-old right fielder fields 756, right? So this turns out to be a pretty disastrous move for the defense of Louisville. So here's Davidson himself. So about a month into the season, he just demands that someone buy this losing team from him, or he's going to disband the team after 1 month. Threatening to leave the American Association with only 7 teams to play games, just 1 month into their schedule. Finally, people talk him out of that stupidity, and he agrees to hold on to the team a week later. But for about a week there in mid-May, the American Association faced the prospect of being down to 7 teams right in the middle of their schedule. Next thing is he decides to start rescheduling Louisville home games into road games where they think they can make more money playing in other cities. According to one of the sports writers, he said, it also means more than the death of the Louisville club. In plain words, it threatens the integrity of the game to permit clubs to change their scheduled dates at will and to move about from city to city in search of gate receipts like tramps is positively insulting to the city which the peregrinating club is supposed to represent, and absolutely unfair to the leading clubs in the race, as some of them must reap undue advantage from such transfers. In short, such transferring is nothing more or less than hippodroming. If you're not familiar with the word hippodroming, that was a synonym for gambling, dishonest play, being in the pay of gamblers. It actually dates all the way back to the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. Their big chariot racing stadium was known as the Hippodrome, but the Byzantine Empire had an awful historical reputation at the time, and so it got associated with gambling and dishonesty, and the word is transferred. The next thing Davidson does is to start fining his players when they make mistakes. So Pete Browning, one of their outfielders, says he's fined me $335. And I find that after playing for the club for 2 months, I'm indebted to it $225. At this rate, I will soon owe the Louisville club more money than I can pay back in a lifetime. And same thing goes to other guys. One of the pitchers on the team, Guy Hecker, had a net pay of $2 1 month after he got done getting fined. And so by June, the team is just furious about all this treatment, understandably enough. So they're supposed to play some games in New York in June, and 6 of the players just refuse to play. They go on strike and say, we're not going to play until all this nonsense stops. And 6 other players attempt to keep playing with some local semi-pros. The games gets rained out, so they don't actually play. But you can see that half the team is in open revolt at this time. Also interesting to note that there's only 12 players on this road trip. This is another money-saving thing that Davidson did, was to not even bring the whole team on road trips. They wouldn't have to pay their transportation and their hotel bills. He wasn't the only owner of the time who did that, but that was just one more cheap way he had of trying to save money. Eventually, things kind of get resolved with the case goes to the league office and some guys get fined some money. But the team morale is about as low as it can be at this time. This is what one player who wasn't even willing to have his name quoted for fear of getting retribution had to say. He said, "We had no money on all the trip, and manager McKinney had received orders from Mr. Davidson to not even give us money with which to have our uniforms washed. Nearly all the players were compelled to borrow money from the Kansas City and St. Louis players, and several of the boys had to pawn their jewelry to pay their laundry bills." Now, the manager McKinney mentioned in this quote's an interesting guy. He was, the papers referred to him as a doorkeeper, which is a fancy way of saying he was a bouncer in the Louisville area. So Davidson hires Buck McKinney as the team's manager, basically because he was a big dude. He was on good terms with the players, it seems, but as one of the sports writers at the time said, whether he will make a good baseball manager is a question of which we can offer no safe opinion. So why does Davidson hire this guy? Essentially, he is worried that his players are going to pummel him whenever they come across him. This is basically a bodyguard for Davidson because his own team is so angry at him. So essentially, he had to hire his team manager to be his own bodyguard. Also, worth pointing out, at this time, the team manager was basically a businessman. At this point, what we think of as the manager, the field manager, was the team captain at this point. So essentially, this guy McKinney is there to be the bodyguard for Davidson. All right, well, those are some of the management issues going on. It says eventually Davidson sells the team to some Louisville capitalists at the end of the year, and things get a little better, but obviously the 1888 season was ruined for Louisville and thus hurting the association. Now, the particular form of greed I want to talk about here is the practice mentioned a couple of quotes ago of some teams would start to trade games at home and turn them into road games in cities where they thought that more people would show up and they'd make more money. We can see that this happened a little bit in 1887. 140 game schedule was what they were supposed to play. So any number over 70 in one of these columns indicates teams that are trading their games in 1887. And the numbers don't sum to 140 because some games got rained out or called early because of darkness and they didn't finish all of them. But in 1888, things get way worse. You can see the numbers here. And the teams listed on the chart are in the order of their finish from 1888. So no surprise, the teams that played a lot more home games won a lot more than the teams that took to the road frequently. And easy to understand how this would wreck the competitive balance of the league. You're never going to draw fans to see your team if you don't even give them home games to go and watch. And they're never going to make connections with the players that you do from going to the ballpark and seeing players who you really like. So someone asked Cincinnati's owner, Aaron Stern was his name, St. Louis sports writer Joe Pritchard asked him about this. And he said, why not? The Cincinnati club is giving these clubs large guarantees to come to Cincinnati. And we have done this because we know we will make money by the operation. I don't think that the association would meddle with anything that is none of its business. If two clubs agree mutually to change games, whose business is it? And as for the association, I don't know as I will be in the association next year, and I'm not certain that I will be in the baseball business at all in 1889. And this is really, really typical for the American Association, that the owners behaved as if what they did only impacted their team and not the group. And this was a really common point of view that owners tended to take in 1880s baseball. One more reason that the cohesiveness of the American Association is not very good. All right, so the third big issue going on is two of these owners, Charles Byrne in Brooklyn and Chris Bondaraha in St. Louis, developed this massive personal rivalry. If you don't know much about Chris Bondaraha, he was a really combative, mercurial, a guy who would see conspiracies anytime his team lost more than a couple games in a row. About the only way I have sympathy for him is that the press kind of made fun of him because he was a recent immigrant and spoke with a pretty heavy German accent. But in a lot of ways, he really brought it on himself with some of the things he said and he did. But in any case, St. Louis and Brooklyn are by far the two best teams in the league in 1889. And at the end of the year, they have this 3-game series scheduled in Brooklyn. And it's what happens in the first game of the series is kind of infamous and really shows everything that was really everything that was bad about 19th century baseball. I personally think it'd be a lot of fun to play 19th century style baseball when it was played right. But anyway, here's what happens to show you what happens when it goes wrong. So in the first game of the series, Brooklyn gets the lead early on, a couple early runs. And so St. Louis starts stalling. Their hope is that if they stall long enough, it'll get dark. They can't play 5 innings and they won't lose that way. Charles Comiskey, future White Sox owner, is the first baseman and the captain of St. Louis. And so, he starts calling in outfielders to conference with him at first base after every batter and all this other nonsense. But then St. Louis gets the lead in the middle innings of the game. And so then they start stalling for the other reason. They're like, well, if we have the lead, we can get the game called after 5 or 6 innings, we can win without giving Brooklyn a chance to come back. So now they're stalling, but it's because they have the lead and they want to get the game called before Brooklyn can make a comeback. So things are so bad that in the 7th inning, the Browns actually light candles on the bench to emphasize to the umpire, a former pitcher named Fred Goldsmith, how dark it is and that he needs to call the game. And of course, this is in Brooklyn. The fans are angry. They're throwing debris at the Browns bench. They almost start a fire when some paper almost catches on fire. So then in the 9th inning, Comiskey just says, it's too dark, we're not playing anymore, and just takes his team off the field. So the Browns leave after the first batter of the inning for Brooklyn gets on base. Comiskey says, yeah, we're done, and leaves the field. Now, as is his right to do, the umpire, Fred Goldsmith, then awards Brooklyn the forfeit because St. Louis did not stay on the field to finish the game. So after this, Von der Ahe gets furious and refuses to even play the next 2 games of the series. His official excuse was that some of the fans got rough with his players after the first game, although most of the sources claim that the St. Louis players started it, especially Tommy McCarthy. Had a reputation as kind of a rough guy. So Von der Ahe doesn't even play the other 2 games of the series. And when everything goes to the league office, they actually give the win to St. Louis in the first game, overrule their own umpire's judgment. And so, as you might imagine, Charles Byrne is absolutely furious when this happens. The great sports writer Henry Chadwick says, evidently the heathen deities have got hold of Chris Von der Ahe and have him on slate for destruction. So all the impartial people watching this thing play out realize that this is horrible for the integrity of the game, that one team can just kind of bulldoze the umpire in the league office into doing what they want. All right, well, that's not the end of things, though. When the season ends, last day of the schedule, Brooklyn has 93 wins, St. Louis 89. Brooklyn's a clear pennant winner. But Von der Ahe will not concede. Once again, they haven't played the same number of games because of rainouts and darkness, but Von der Ahe will not admit that his team has lost the pennant. So here's what he does. On his own authority, the league has nothing to do with this, but he goes to the owners in Philadelphia and Cincinnati and says, we want 5 more games. We'll play them all at your stadium. You keep all the money, because if we win all 5, we will then have more wins than Brooklyn and win the pennant. So all this is happening after the season's already ended. And so this is where Brooklyn has to resort to some underhanded tactics of their own. So Doc Bichong is their catcher. He had been the catcher of St. Louis, but Brooklyn had acquired him. And so he shows up and starts handing out money, cigars, and fur coats to the Cincinnati players to motivate them to beat St. Louis and spoil this plan. He takes his old friend, the second baseman of St. Louis, Yank Robinson, on a drinking spree the night before the doubleheader. And it does work. Cincinnati wins one of the games and foils Von der Ahe's plan. But if you're Charles Byrne in Brooklyn looking at this, of course, you're understandably furious that even these things even happened in the first place. And that leads us to problem 4 of the American Association. And that is that in 1889, the state of Ohio banned Sunday baseball. Porkopolis is what people called Cincinnati at the time. And so without Sunday baseball to bring in the big fan base, Cincinnati is looking at switching leagues. And then the city of churches, that's Brooklyn. New York is rumored that they're going to ban Sunday baseball as well. And so Brooklyn, I mean, they've been drawing 4,000 or 5,000 fans to each game on Sunday, which for that era was an enormous number of fans. So what happens is, as soon as the 1889 season ends, Brooklyn goes to the National League. Cincinnati goes with them. Kansas City leaves the league to join the Western League. They basically combine themselves with the already existing Western League team. And Baltimore drops out as well to join the Atlantic Association. So half the team leaves after 1880, or excuse me, half the league leaves after 1889. They have Louisville, Columbus, St. Louis, and Philadelphia, and they replace the departed teams with Rochester, Syracuse, Toledo, and a new Brooklyn team that doesn't even make it all the way through the schedule. What happens is Baltimore jumps back in the middle of the season to finish Brooklyn's schedule, essentially. All right. So to wrap up where things stand in 1890 as compared to 1887, on the left and the right, you see the 8 teams that made up the league in those years and their population. And you can see that by 1890, the league has about half the fan base to draw on that it used to. If you've ever owned a business or done any kind of accounting, you know that when you lose half your potential customers, it's pretty difficult to succeed in business and keep yourself afloat. And so even though the league lasts one more year, they do play an 1891 season after this. 1888 and 89 are really the end of the American Association as a league with enough big cities to support Major League Baseball and support the payroll that you have to get decent players and call yourself a major league team. So to bring us back to where we started this presentation and what got me interested in the beginning, you might ask yourself, what did the Players League have to do with all these things that happened? And the answer is absolutely nothing. Everything that I told you about tonight would have happened regardless of if the Players League had ever existed. It is true that the Players League does steal a few association players. I think the number is 26 or maybe it's 28, a couple from each team. But it's at least my view that all this would have happened regardless of had the Players League ever existed. The association owners are so good at shooting themselves in the foot and driving the good teams out of the league that the league was doomed after 1889. So if you made it all through the talk, thanks for your time. And now I believe is when I will take questions from anyone who might have them.
I have 2 questions. One,
okay.
How many teams could not play on Sunday for the American Association? I know Philadelphia was that for a long, long time, but what about the other teams? How many could play on Sunday and how many couldn't?
Yeah, the general situation is Bob, can I stop sharing the screen now?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think you need to see all my tabs open. So the general thing was the National League did not play games on Sunday. None of the league teams played on Sunday, whereas most American Association cities of the 1880s did. And again, the big reason was at that time, 6-day work week was normal. So they wanted to bring in the more working class style of fans to their games, whereas the National League, Al Spalding had a big influence in the National League, and he was not nearly as interested in bringing in fans to see Sunday games. So the National Leagues did not play them at all.
Thank you.
I have a question. I love the 19th century stuff. What were some of your sources on this?
Most of the quotes that you saw were from the Sporting Life newspaper. Are you familiar with that one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's where I got most of them. The Sporting News also gave me a few. They were not, that paper was not quite as good at that time as the Sporting Life was. And then, yeah, I used some of the other major papers of the day, New York Times, and some of those who see the Chicago Inter-Ocean had a good baseball column sometimes. So yeah, mostly major newspapers, along with a few of the books about the association that like David Nemec has written over the years and so forth.
I had another question. You mentioned, what was the guy's name you thought was the worst owner ever?
Mordecai Davidson in Louisville.
How did he compare to the owner who stripped the Cleveland Spiders in 1899?
Yeah, yeah. The difference was by then, you might remember that there are a lot of owners who owned more than one team or had owned
Yes.
shares in more than one team.
Yeah,
And they, like
right.
Barney Dreyfus, transferred Louisville guys to Pittsburgh and
Right.
basically created the Pittsburgh dynasty out of Louisville players,
Yeah.
like Fred Clark and Hannes Wagner and some of those guys. So yeah, I think that's the difference as I see it, is by the 1890s, owners had an obvious conflict of interest in moving guys from one team to another. Whereas here, it's just Davidson wanted to just make short-term cash. One of the reasons the team was so bad in 1889 was he sold a couple players just for money before the season even started to amp up his profits a little bit. And
Right. Okay. good.
yeah.
So, Rob, are any of the ballparks or anything that were there then, are they marked, or is there any significant like places where they might be observed or anything? Thinking of the SABR ballpark, memorial kind of thing.
Mhm.
Are there any plaques or signage or anything like that? These ballparks, that would you know?
That's a good question that I don't claim to know the answer to. I did most of this research from my living room rather than traveling to all these places. As I'm looking in the comments, I think I do know the answer to one. Oh yeah, Matthew asking about the gate split at this time. It's in one of my books, but I think that the answer was when they did decide to split the gates instead of going to a lump sum. I want to say it was 70-30, 70 for home and 30 for the visitor. But that's it's in one of my books. I can look it up if you really want to know. I have it somewhere, but I think that's what the number was.
Well, Rob, this was really interesting. Thanks for all the time and effort you put into put this all together.
Oh yeah, you're certainly welcome. This is like I said, I'm really fascinated about the 1880s, 1890s game, and so it's yeah, I spent about 6 years researching all this stuff, and so it's good to at least get a couple presentations out of it.
Yeah, you did this the 19th century group, didn't you?
Yeah, I'm a member of the 19th century research committee, and I did this presentation for them first. Yeah, yeah, they didn't hammer me on it too bad, so I thought it might be good enough to do again. Some of those guys know so much; it's just scary.
You know, when I was doing my history of Major League Baseball and doing the 19th century, it was amazing that in 1888, I believe it was, where King Kelly made $10,000. And when the National League went to 12 teams throughout the 90s, nobody ever made more than $2,500, no matter how good a season they had.
Yeah, that does speak to the influence of monopoly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Of course,
Yeah.
there was a big depression in the 1890s.
Yeah, Panic of 1893 didn't help.
Right.
It's true. Yeah.
No, why did you say didn't you say something about you wish you could play by those rules in the American Association? Did I hear that right?
Well, I just knowing what I know about the 1890s game, it just sounds like it'd be a fun game to play because they put a lot of emphasis on speed and base running and putting the ball in play. So, fielders could show their skill at fielding the ball. It really emphasized movement. Whereas, as we all know from watching the Major League Baseball of 2021, really does not emphasize movement on the field. It emphasized big burly guys who can hit over the fence and pitchers who can make you swing and miss. A lot of standing around. That's what I meant when I thought that the 1880s game would be a lot of fun to play as a player because you'd be constantly moving and doing things. And boy, at that time, if the game lasted more than an hour and a half, the fans would not stand for it.
Yeah.
They start getting upset at the umpire for not moving the game along faster.
Have you ever played vintage baseball?
God, I wish I could. I live in such a remote place. I live over on the Pacific coast of Washington State in Pacific County. And there's just an individual who plays around. I'd really like to though, because I think it'd be very fun.
They used to play in the summertime at Fort Vancouver. It's been some years since that happened, but there was always like some summers, like maybe even 3 or 4 games on the field there at Fort Vancouver. And I haven't done it in a while. I don't know why exactly, but I guess the teams, we had a connection with a couple of teams, but it's been a while since we did anything.
Yeah.
We had a group that played in the Heritage Days at Marymore Park. And
Okay.
we played under 1862 rules.
Okay, that's one of Bothell, right?
That's it's not really Bothell, it's more Woodinville.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
really Redmond, between Redmond and Woodinville.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. We used to do that annually, but they haven't done that in quite a few years now.
When Fort Vancouver had its games, they were played by those rules because they were replicating Civil War era town versus fort personnel, the citizens versus the soldiers.
But wasn't it sometime around sometime in the 1880s when they first began to allow overhand pitching?
Yeah, one of the guys on our 19th century committee is kind of an expert on that. But if I remember what he said right, it was about 1886, 7, 8 when the transition came from sidearm to 3/4 to all the way overhand being legal. Yeah. Don't quote me on that, but I seem to remember him telling us that before.
That sounds right.
This may be a stupid question because I've forgotten when this happened, but in 19th century baseball, when did they go from barehanded to gloves? When was that?
It was a gradual thing that more or less the 1880s. If I remember right, Bid McPhee was the last guy to really play with no glove. And I think he retired, I don't remember, but like 1888 or somewhere in that ballpark.
Okay, good.
So I think by the end of the decade, pretty much everyone had gloves, but at the start of the decade, not necessarily.
Okay.
Wasn't one of your images of someone fielding,
Right, Estabrook,
field a ball without barehanded?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, the one of Estabrook.
Little bit of a correction, gentlemen. Bid McPhee played into the late 1890s.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I had wrong.
And by
wrong 10 column.
1896, 97 is when he finally decided he would put a glove on. But before that, no.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, maybe it was 1888 when he started being notable for not having one compared to everyone. Maybe that's where I got the number from. But yeah, thank you.
Another of those milestones, like the last guy who didn't wear a batting helmet, and then the last guy who didn't wear a flap on his batting helmet. I know that was Tim Raines, but I don't recall the last guy who didn't have a helmet.
Well, could be the last time we see a pitcher bat. This last year, who knows? Who's the last pitcher to bat?
Ohtani will still bat.
That's true. Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I think all the last Sunday games start at 3 o'clock Eastern time or something, so there's no advantages gained. So it'll be extra hard to say who was the last pitcher to bat.
Yeah,
I'm sure they could figure that out. Just like there was the what is it, the 100,000th run or the 1,000,000th run that was scored, and Bob Watson and David Concepcion were racing around the bases to be the one.
It'll be the next record to fall. Okay, well, Rob, thank you very much. I enjoyed that a lot, and I think everyone else did too. That was, and you know, I'm really happy to be here saying this now that all of our presenters were Northwest SABR presenters here. So those of us who remember only in-person meetings where everyone would be together, this kind of replicates that. And we really, some sooner or later we're going to be able to meet in person. But one nice thing about the remote thing is that we can connect. People here on this meeting are from all over the Northwest there as well, and we would never be able to do that. Certainly not on a Tuesday night, and all see each other here. So that makes me happy to do that.
Can I make one plea for people to review abstracts for the convention? I know I haven't heard from you, Bob, but I'm sure I'm putting you on the list.
Yeah, I'll do my duty.
And David Alvarez too. Let's see. I'm trying to see if there's anybody else from the.
Tim Herlick is on it. Tim Herlick is on, isn't he? You get him?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
He does sometimes, but not other times.
Okay.
But anyway, it's an easy process. It's all done online these days, making it a lot easier on those
Neil,
of us.
go ahead. Why don't you explain who you are and what you're talking about?
Oh, okay.
For everyone that can know.
I am one of the two presentation wranglers for the National Convention, by which I mean Scott Fishthal and I are the ones who collect the abstracts, de-identify them, put them out for review by obviously blinded reviewers, and then determine who are the best 32. Unfortunately, we can't get any more presentations. Also, there are posters as well, and then we schedule them, and we end up being the AV guys. But one of the things that we need is reviewers of the abstracts. So that's what I'm asking for. If you want to be, send me an email.
Yeah, Neil, you can count on me on both.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll also need judges at the convention, but obviously many of you will not be at the convention.
Is it in Baltimore this year?
It is in Baltimore this year. As it was supposed to be last year, as it was supposed to be the year before.
I'm sure nothing can go wrong with this plan.
Yeah, right. Well, it's at least it's late. It's going to be in August. I
Yeah.
think about the latest we've ever been.
Well, we're assuming that baseball is going to be being played by August. So
We don't need to have baseball played to have a convention.
that's a good thing. I've heard that it's sometimes played in August, though, Neil. Okay.
We are more concerned with baseball in the 1880s than with baseball in the 20s.
Well, we could probably get a better know people who know more about who was the MVP in 1935 than who was the MVP last year. Some of this stuff. Hey, Helen Edwards, I'm gonna call on you. You have some news.
Yes, I do. Let me see. Yes, I do have some news, and it is baseball related. It's been a year in the making, but I can finally announce that I have become part of the ownership team of the Victoria Harbor Cats, the Nanaimo Night Owls, and the Victoria Golden Tide. They're all college baseball teams. The first two play in the summertime. And the Golden Tide is affiliated with University of Victoria and Coast College in Victoria, and they play in the fall and the spring. And it gets pretty cold, but we'll do it. And it's just a new program, so I'm very excited to be part of it. And we'll see how it goes from there.
Helen, where are they going to be playing the games?
At Royal Athletic Park in Victoria. And the Nanaimo is Sir Oxman Stadium, which is just being completely rebuilt. There's a new team in Edmonton that was supposed to start last year, but of course couldn't. And there's a new team in Kamloops, There's also a team in Kelowna. So there's quite a large Canadian contingent to the league. There just used to be, Victoria and Kelowna, and that was it. And now there's quite a large Canadian contingent. And one of these days, somebody's going to beat Corvallis. I hope. They have an unfair advantage because their university is in their town. Our guys have to leave. Sometimes when they're in the playoffs, they have to leave to get back to school. So, we'll see.
Helen, is it a wooden bat league?
Yes, and it's so much fun. It's not the major leagues, but I tell you, we have way more fun at a game than I ever did at a major league game.
Is there a conflict that you own part of more than one team?
No, because our ownership group created the second team in Nanaimo. It might be sold off sometime, I don't know. But there's nothing that says you can't. And we had to wait for league approval. That's why I couldn't announce it. Because they wanted to make sure evidently that nobody was trying to buy into the West Coast League to destroy it or so. I don't know, some sort of
I don't know.
politics.
I feel the ghost of Barney Dreyfus kind of hanging all over us.
There was something, and we how we were able to finance the expansion fee for the Nanaimo team was by three of us coming in as a unit. So.
Yes,
You're typing, go on your mute, go on mute, you're typing.
Yeah, yes, are you sure that you're not going to be charged with hippodroming?
And on a side note, if you want me to read abstracts, I'll read abstracts. I've read abstracts for heritage conferences. I could read them for baseball too. So
Is Port Angeles still in that league?
Is which?
Port Angeles?
Yes. Yeah, they joined 3 years ago.
Right.
Yeah, the lefties. Yeah.
Yeah, that's only an hour from where I live.
Okay. Yeah.
I think they moved from my hometown of Bremerton, unfortunately.
Well, I don't know. There was some teams that had about like 100 people in the stands, and they moved. So I haven't been able to keep track of it all because, of course, for 2 seasons we haven't played. So they did in the States last year, but we weren't allowed to. So hopefully we will be able to play this year.
Well, keep us up to date on it.
I will. I just been busted to tell somebody, and
Yeah.
and I had to keep quiet for a year. It's driven me nuts.
We'll keep it under our hats, but keep it like.
Oh no,
post-
it's out now. Everybody knows. So,
Okay.
yeah, the league has approved, and it's out in the local press. So they think it's crazy that some female owns a part of a baseball team. Come on, this is the 21st century.
Yeah, that's the West Coast League that Rob Dyer is commissioner of.
Yes.
It's the best collegiate wooden bat league west of the Mississippi, and probably about the 5th best wooden bat collegiate league in the nation.
Yeah, it's good baseball.
It sure is.
It's a fun
Really
league.
good.
It's great.
Yeah, it is. So I put my money where my mouth is.
Okay. So you're going to be a regular presence then at all these games? Is that should we look for you there if we go to the games there?
I'm always there anyhow. I have I sit on the third base line in the front row. So I'm not changing where I sit. I might actually have to leave my seat and do some work now that I'm an owner, but I don't know. We'll see.
Well, folks, we've got 2 great presentations, and I want to thank both of our presenters for doing that. We have time here for bar time. We can't go out together and go to a bar, but we have time here if people want to have a conversation about the Hall of Fame or the strike or who's doing what or anything else there. The floor is open.
Well, here.
This pool they're suggesting for performance of players with less than 6 years experience seems like a really good idea. They just, they just have to put some money into it. And then the idea would be that if you're less than 6 years, you're not arbitration eligible, you could get money for having a great year on top of your salary. Otherwise, the players could have great years and still only earn the league minimum. Or they can, or you end up doing a Ronald Acuna and taking a salary, bargaining away your free agent years and far less than you might really be worth. So I think that's going to be, the thing that dissolves the deadlock.
The big problem that I see is, in the past, great players have been rewarded for their greatness by another team. Because when they get their free agency at age 29, they're on the way down already. Well, I think they're getting much more ruthless about that, perhaps because of analytics. And those guys are not going to get those big salaries anymore, I think. It's going to be, now that what they then have to do, of course, is get more money to the people while they're good. But you're not going to have somebody getting a 10-year contract for $350 million at the age of 32.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're Albert Pujols, yeah.
Well, no, you did. You had Albert Pujols.
That wasn't a good. That wasn't a good deal, though.
No, it wasn't, right.
Yeah,
except for him.
Well, I mean, I think the 22-year-olds deserve more, deserve this chance to dip into this performance pot.
Yeah.
Well, if the owners are absolutely against changing the 6 years before you're a free agent, the only option I see is you have to jack up the minimum wage and have this pool of money for players in their earlier years.
Right.
I mean, that's the only other option I see how the players can improve their situation.
Yeah, the players asked that the minimum salary be $750K, I think.
Yeah.
Which is by the local standard, because I think the owners were doing 660 or something like that. Well, that difference is infinitesimal.
Yeah.
Right.
But the owners are of course, greedy as all hell and not going to even back down on that.
Yeah.
An $11 billion industry or whatever it is, yeah.
Well, like anything, it's probably a negotiating tool, and I'm sure they would agree to it if they thought they were getting more in it in response. But, did they ever ask the fans? I would think the fans would say they'd be in favor of keeping players on the team as long as they could, but pay them for that, and that's where the player pool, I don't think fans would be in favor of reducing the free agency period because they'd want to keep the homegrown player as long as they could, but pay them for performance.
Except that
you think so?
The naive fan is saying, these scrubs are getting $650,000 for playing a game, even though, of course, they're the best in the world at it.
Yeah, I don't think the fans are focused on the 25th player on the roster. They're on the top 2 or 3, and if they can hang on to them longer, even if they have to pay more at the gate to watch them, or on cable, I think they'd accept that. And they'd stay fans of the team and of the sport.
Any comments on 14 teams in the playoffs out of 30? I think it's a bad idea, but what do I know?
Terrible idea.
I mean, it turns into a tournament, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's rewarding mediocrity.
Right.
Well, the Brewers were in the postseason 2 seasons ago with a losing record. even at that point, you know. And they're going to the postseason, but you know, they
Well,
play one game and then they're out, you know.
One way
But-
around it is to keep fewer teams, but make all series 7 games.
Yeah.
That would take too long.
We would definitely play the World Series in November. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you can cut down the regular season. You know, there's no money in the regular season anyway.
Right. I proposed that. I proposed the whole thing about 3 teams of 10
Yeah,
leagues.
I
3
remember
teams of
your
10
proposal.
teams.
Very, very insightful.
Only 146 games in the regular season. Anyway, I won't bore
So-
you with that again.
So with 14 teams in the playoff, the winner of each division would draw a bye,
No,
and then the 4 teams would play off. How would that be scheduled?
the team with the greatest had the greatest number of wins would get a bye. Then the other 3 division winners, in order of the number of victories, could choose which of the wild card teams they could play. And all 3 games would be at the of the division winners. That's at least what I understand it to be right now.
Well, there would be 4 divisions though. Well, there was only 3 divisions.
That would be how many wild card teams?
14
wild-
would be 7 in each.
Yeah, so there'd be 4 wild card teams in each league.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But then you would have, okay, yeah, and then, yeah.
And once those wild card games are over with, then you'd fall into the normal, what we have right now with the division series.
Right.
Yeah.
So a team in a very weak division that just, wins a whole slew of games could draw a bye versus, teams in a very competitive.
If they do it like football, only 1 team gets a bye and the other 6 teams play in the wild card games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they've only been doing that for exactly 1 year.
No, I know, that's true, but I'm just saying if they choose to follow that route, it's all, yeah.
Of course, the difference being that those are all 1-game series.
Yeah, right. I mean, the one funny thing about getting a bye like that is that baseball's such a matter of routine that if you're that team that had the bye for 4 or 5 days, are you going to be cold again coming into your division series? I mean, that could easily happen to somebody.
Well, experience
And it
says
makes it more of a
that's true.
tournament.
Yeah, experience says that that's true with all the wild card teams that advance into the World Series and everything else there. It's when you're hot at the end of right at the right time there.
Right.
Hey, I've just got a question, to the floor. Would it be, interested, would people be interested in just saying, we're gonna get together, let's just say at Cheney Stadium on a certain date in May, and anybody that's available show up and we'll watch the computer umpire, and we'll just get together and have a no presentations or anything, but at least we'll have a gathering together. Would people be interested in that?
Yeah, Tim, that's what Tip and I thought. And I put out a message. I wrote a kind of a long thing there some weeks ago talking about that. And right now, I know there are people in this chapter that are really jonesing to have a face-to-face meeting.
Yeah.
Right now, I think the virus is still going to be in charge for that. And like I say, when you look around and look at the people that are here, they're still from Canada and all over. One of the things about our chapter is that it's so spread out. And so this allows us to really connect and do other things. But I think you're right. And that's what Tip and I thought too, that the path to seeing each other face to face there would be for just to us to go to a ball game in the summertime in the open air, and it would just be more like a gathering of friends, an erudite baseball conversation rather than a meeting with presentations.
I can't promise erudite, yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I'm thinking the Rainiers for a couple of reasons. The automatic umpire would be interesting to watch. It's kind of, as equidistant as we can get. And supposedly, regardless of the status of the major league baseball players, the minor leagues are supposed to play. Now, I don't know who's going to cross the picket line, but
would there be a picket line at the minor league?
No picket line in the
who
minor
knows?
leagues. No, there's no issue for the minor leagues.
Yeah, because they're not part of the MLBPA.
Right. But I don't know if Julio Rodriguez would say, well, I'm not going to be offensive to my future major league brethren by crossing the picket line. Probably not. But I'm just thinking.
I'm trying to remember. I mean, that didn't happen in 94, did it?
There was only an issue when they got called up to a major league game in spring training.
Yeah.
No issue of minor leaguers playing in a minor league game. No issue at all.
Right.
So can we complain when Hal 9000 misses a call?
Hal 9000, I love it.
We can disable him like they did, open the pod door, Hal,
That was a strike, Hal.
We
I don't know, Hal.
Go in and disable him.
Tim, by May, you may be seeing that in the major leagues. You might not have to go to Tacoma.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. Yeah, we'll see it in the major leagues before too long, but it'd be interesting to see it worked out in the minor leagues.
Yeah.
At the high minor leagues.
Yeah. That was a strike, Hal.
Well,
that was a strike, David. Yeah.
I guess for the chapter, if anybody, for a hops game or a pickle game or any game in Vancouver or any place else in Tacoma or anything, if somebody wanted to say, I'd like to see if somebody wants to do it, I'll put out a message and get people to sign up. I think that's what's going to happen, and we could do that, and you wouldn't have to be something that the chapter per se organizes in terms of doing that, But our intention is to continue, whatever happens, is to at least continue to do remote kinds of meetings as well. Even if everything is going along swimmingly there, we'll still do some form of online stuff just for things like this. So we can have a weeknight thing and spend a couple hours and do this.
And we'll have one on March 1st, right?
March 1st, we have a speaker from the. You can see her picture on the chapter's Facebook page right now, and Tip organized this, and you'll find out about it. So it should be good.
Good.
Yeah. So a month from today, we'll have the next one.
And it's exactly 4 weeks, just by the fact that February is so short.
Right.
Yeah.
So flip it off there. Okay.
Yep.
One thing that happened with this pandemic, I show up on the Zoom meetings for the Sacramento, San Francisco chapter, for the Chicago chapter, because I'm from that area. You can go to all these meetings anywhere. It's great.
Yeah.
And your speakers can be from anywhere. They don't have to.
Yeah. Some of these authors could do a round of stuff. They show up at the different meetings and stuff like that. You have a baseball book.
Yeah, and you don't have to pay $300 for a COVID test to attend. So.
Yeah.
Which is what I had to do when I went to Seattle. 300 going there and 200 coming back. And I'm going to see Ichiro go in the ring thing in August. I'm hoping I don't have to do that again because it was hellishly expensive.
Yes,
Uh,
yeah. Uh-huh.
You know, I mean, I
Yeah.
went last August and
Yeah.
it was fabulous, but it was expensive to get
But-
there and get back.
And, that's prohibitively for us to say, okay, let's all go up and, let's.
Well,
go.
no,
Yeah.
it'd be a little, it's cheaper in the States, but then you still have to have the test here to go back and yeah, yes, hoping that will all be gone. And then I can just hop on a ferry and be there.
Yeah.
Yeah. The things we took for granted.
Yeah.
Well, it's 8:30. Are we ready to
Yeah.
come to a stopping point here?
Yeah, I'm putting in the chat a place I found, a podcast called Fade Away. There's only 9 episodes, but they're really pretty interesting episodes.
Okay.
I got him
Okay.
Eric Enders. I don't know if he's a SABR guy or not, but anyway, it could be. Did a really interesting one on Ed Hobbs, the guy from the famous Cubs rookie who died in a
Okay.
plane crash.
Yeah, Ken Hobbs, wasn't it?
Ken Hobbs, yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Anyway, I recommend it. There's a couple
All
other
right.
good ones.
I think that's Ken Hubbs.
Hubs, yeah. Not Roy
He's a
Hobbs.
Yeah.
Thank you for that correction. Yeah, right. Absolutely. All right, so long, everybody.
Okay,
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Take care, all.
great to
Hasta
see everyone.
luego.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thanks for all the good presentations.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Bob.
yeah. See you guys.